A chief judge had just acquitted a mafia boss of all his crimes. The ruthless and dangerous mafia boss was called Tony, and he was the biggest drug kingpin in the country. While in another place, a man entered an empty warehouse, and he's called Malik. He was a corrupt policeman who worked for Tony. When Malik called Tony, suddenly a man wearing a mask appeared and approached him. The man was Naz, and he really didn't think that Malik was a corrupt police officer. Naz said that Malik should be ashamed of God and the people, because a policeman's job is to catch criminals, not collaborate with them. So without thinking twice, Naz immediately attacked Malik. In the end, Malik died after being killed by Naz. The next morning, the police found Malik's body covered neatly. The murderer was Naz, and he was a police officer from the narcotics department. Naz had always been secretly killing corrupt police and the people who work with Tony, the mafia boss. Because of that, he was often nicknamed the meth killer. But until now, no one knows that the meth killer is Naz. When Naz and his team were in the office, detective from headquarters, Jennifer, came to meet them. Jennifer discussed the murder incident that had been happening recently, and she realized that all the victims were related to Tony. But Jennifer's arrival was not to handle Tony's case, but to catch the meth killer. Jennifer thought that the meth killer was not supposed to eradicate criminals at his will, because in this country there are laws that must be obeyed. That night, Naz was on the way home with his older sister, who was also a police officer. In fact, they were both on the same team. Naz asked his sister about the meth killer's actions. Naz's sister said that meth killer was clearly a criminal because he had committed so many massacres, even though she knew that meth killer's targets were the criminals. Hearing this, Naz was just silent, because he's the meth killer. At the same time, Tony was torturing one of his men. Tony was very annoyed because his man couldn't find the meth killer. Tony didn't want his people to continue being killed by meth killer. Then without hesitation, he killed his man to vent his frustration. After that, Tony ordered his right-hand man to investigate the narcotics department officers who were targeting him. He was sure that one of the police was the meth killer. Meanwhile, an elite police officer from the head office named Sheriff Fadin, or usually called Sheriff. At that time, Sheriff and two of his men went to the local police station to meet the police chief. The police chief was very surprised when he saw Sheriff's arrival. It turned out that Sheriff had come there to interrogate the police chief regarding his job in eradicating online gambling. The police chief defended himself, saying that he had closed many casinos and he felt he had done enough work to eradicate the gambling. Sheriff then said that now, people gamble online and rarely go to casinos. Sheriff also provided some evidence that the police chief often received money transfers from online gambling bosses. Not only that, Sheriff also had a recording which explained that the police chief was the person who was backing up the gambling bosses, so that they could continue to run their business safely. Feeling cornered, the police chief tried to fight back and point guns at each other. The police chief ran out into the parking lot, and when he was about to leave using his car, the steering wheel had been removed by Sheriff. The police chief finally surrendered and was arrested for cases of bribery and abuse of position. Turns out, Sheriff was a religious person who never leaves prayer. While the gambling case had been officially closed because the gambling boss and the officers who were bribed had been arrested by Sheriff, shortly, Sheriff met the superintendent at the Central Police. The superior was going to assign Sheriff to take part in handling the case of meth killer and Tony, the mafia boss. On the other hand, Tony's right-hand man was in the car, and he was suddenly held at gunpoint by meth killer. Naz immediately asked the hand man to go to an old building. Arriving there, Naz beat Tony's right-hand man so that he would tell him information about Tony's headquarters. Because he was continuously being tortured, in the end, Tony's right-hand man told Naz the information, but after that, Naz killed the man. The next day, the police found Tony's right-hand man's body, and the meth killer, Naz, was also there. Jennifer, as the assigned detective to catch meth killer, felt annoyed because meth killer was carrying out his brutal actions again. Not long after that, Sheriff came and wanted to see the crime scene. At the police station, they got a package containing a site plan for meth killer. When they checked it, it turned out that the map showed Tony's headquarters, so the police planned to raid Tony's headquarters. When Naz and the other members were about to leave, suddenly Sheriff stopped them. Sheriff explained that he had come here on orders from the highest superior from head office. Then when everyone gathered, Sheriff said that his job was to help Jennifer in catching meth killer. Sheriff also said that he had studied the meth killer case, and he was sure that the meth killer was among them. Therefore, Sheriff asked the officers to enter the interrogation room, and they would be interrogated one by one. During the interrogation, Sheriff and Jennifer asked about what happened when Malik was killed by the meth killer. Malik was a corrupt police officer who was killed by the meth killer. The officers seemed confused in answering the questions, because the incident when Malik died was quite a long time ago. However, Naz was able to answer in detail about where he was when Malik was killed. After interrogating all the members, Sheriff gave applause to Naz, because he was the one who could answer in detail when he was interrogated. For this reason, Sheriff suspected that Naz was the meth killer, because a perpetrator usually has everything prepared before being interrogated. Shortly, the officers returned to continue their mission, raiding Tony's headquarters. But when they arrived there, it turned out that Tony and his group had run away. As a result, they were very annoyed with Sheriff. If he didn't interrogate them first, it's possible that Tony's group will definitely be caught. On the next day, the officers were talking about Sheriff, then one of the members, Cooper, said that Sheriff's father was previously the police chief who had been arrested for accepting bribes from officials. Therefore, Cooper was sure that Sheriff wasn't a good person. Not long after, one of the other members also said that since this morning, Sheriff had gone back and forth to the bathroom 8 times, and it was very suspicious. A few minutes later, Sheriff came out of his room, rushed to the bathroom. Naz tried to peek, and it turned out that Sheriff was using drugs. Naz immediately arrested Sheriff and was helped by his colleagues. When Naz interrogated Sheriff, he was seen to be very angry because Sheriff was using drugs at the narcotics department. Not long after, Jennifer came to explain that the drug used by Sheriff was nothing more than a migraine medicine. Sheriff laughed while looking at the officers, but this incident made Sheriff even more suspicious that Naz was the meth killer because from earlier, Naz was the one who was so ambitious about catching him. That evening, when Naz was at his sister's apartment, his sister said that Sheriff was so sure that Naz was a meth killer. That's why Naz's sister asked carefully whether Sheriff's accusation was true. But Naz didn't want to admit it, and instead got angry at his sister. Several hours later, Naz secretly left the apartment to meet his informant. The informant was the one who always helped Naz in carrying out his actions. Plus, he was the only person who knew that Naz was the meth killer. Here, it was revealed the reasons why Naz and the informant massacred Tony's group and the corrupt police who worked for Tony. Turns out, in the past, Naz was engaged to one of the detectives, but Tony killed her when she was carrying out a mission. While the informant was the detective's younger brother, Naz told the informant to kill one target tomorrow morning because his identity as the meth killer was starting to reveal. The next day, Sheriff and Jennifer asked Naz to go to the interrogation room. Sheriff was sure that Naz was the meth killer, and his motive was revenge. Sheriff deliberately played the video recording sent by Tony's group 1 year ago. At that time, Naz's fiancée was caught while disguised as one of Tony's subordinates, and because of that, Tony and his men tortured and raped her until she died. Naz was trying to stay calm while watching the video, but Sheriff and Jennifer continued to look at Naz, seeing his reaction. Not long after that, Naz's sister came in and asked Sheriff and Jennifer to stop it. Naz's sister informed them that there had just been a murder which seemed to have been committed by the meth killer. Shortly, Sheriff and other officers had arrived at the crime scene, but Sheriff was still sure that the murderer wasn't the real meth killer. At the same time, one of the police officers reported that the perpetrator had been found because previously, there was a witness who had seen him. Sheriff and his members immediately rushed to chase the perpetrator, and it turned out that the perpetrator was Naz's friend, the informant. He was holding a police officer hostage and asked everyone to step back, then he quickly ran away. Not long after, Sheriff and the officers arrived and they tried to chase the informant. During the chase, Sheriff fell off the motorbike while the informant attacked the police. The informant ran away again, and Sheriff took over one of the members' car. Naz looked panicked because he was the one who ordered the informant. Finally, Sheriff managed to stop the informant's car and then arrest him. Shortly, Sheriff and the other officers took the informant to the interrogation room, while Naz's sister was very happy because her brother wasn't the meth killer. Not long after that, Sheriff came and told Naz to interrogate the informant. Naz tried to calm down because the informant was his messenger. In the interrogation room, Naz asked the informant several things. Actually, the informant wanted to answer, but Naz signaled him using his hand so that the informant stayed silent. Naz then beat the informant, reasoning that he didn't want to talk. All the police stopped it, but the informant tried to run away, and finally, one of the officers, Cooper, was forced to finish off the informant. Sheriff was so angry with Cooper because he had finished off the informant, even though he was sure that the informant was just being ordered by someone. The next day, the members of the narcotics department thought that Sheriff and Jennifer would return to head office because their missions had been completed. However, Sheriff explained that the person who died yesterday was not the meth killer because the real one was still among them. It was because the way the perpetrator killed his victims was different from the real meth killer. Sheriff also explained that they always fail to catch Tony and his gang because one of them is a traitor who works for Tony. Therefore, Sheriff asked anyone who worked for Tony to tell Tony that he wanted to cooperate in catching the meth killer. That evening at Tony's place, there was the main rat of Tony, and she was Detective Jennifer. Here, Jennifer said that Sheriff wanted to work with Tony to catch the meth killer, but Jennifer also reminded Tony to be careful because Sheriff was a brutal and intelligent person. When Naz had just returned to his apartment, Sheriff was already there, talking with his sister Alice. Sheriff said that Alice had evidence which proves that the meth killer is part of the narcotics department. This was proven by a recording of Malik before he was killed by the meth killer. At that time, Malik said to Alice that he would pretend to be Tony's subordinate. Malik asked Alice to spread the information to the other members that he was actually a traitor. And sure enough, the day after the information was spread out, Malik was killed, which indicates that the meth killer was one of the narcotics department officers. Sheriff asked Naz to admit that he was the meth killer, but Naz still didn't want to admit it. Before leaving, Sheriff said if Tony killed his fiancée, he might also become a meth killer. After Sheriff left, Naz started to feel depressed because he had killed Malik, who was completely innocent. His friend, the informant, also died due to his mistake. On the other hand, when Sheriff was on the way home, he was suddenly hit by a truck. The one who hit Sheriff was Tony's man, and after the head cover was removed, Tony asked Sheriff if it was true that he wanted to work together to catch the meth killer. Tony then gave a lot of money to Sheriff as a present, but Sheriff refused on the grounds that he already had a lot of money. Sheriff said that he would hand over the meth killer along with the evidence as long as Tony would tell him who the corrupt police who worked for him were. Tony said that he had 2 rats who worked for him, but they didn't know each other. Tony promised to tell Sheriff who they were if Sheriff wanted to hand over the meth killer to him first. In the end, Sheriff was freed and Tony would wait until tomorrow for Sheriff to bring the meth killer. The next morning when Naz was in the parking lot, Jennifer approached him and showed him a photo. It was a picture of Naz with the informant. It means that Jennifer actually already knew that Naz was the meth killer. Then Jennifer said that she wouldn't tell Sheriff about it as long as Naz followed her orders. Apparently, Jennifer was planning to use Naz for her own purposes. Jennifer took Naz somewhere and not long after that, Tony's men appeared to pick up Naz. But suddenly, Jennifer attacked Naz. That noon, Sheriff and the other officers were confused because Naz and Jennifer disappeared. And suddenly, Alice got a message from an unknown number. It was a video sent from Tony, who was currently holding Naz hostage. Tony didn't know that Naz was the meth killer, and he also thought that Alice was the real meth killer. So Tony asked Alice to go to point A alone if she wanted her brother to be safe. Tony also showed a fake video as if Jennifer was being held hostage by him. Here, Tony asked Sheriff and other members to go to point B to save Jennifer. Long story short, Alice went alone to the meeting point. Then some of Tony's men approached her. Before Tony's men took Alice, they checked her first, then they found a tracking device on Alice's clothes. Tony's men took Alice somewhere to meet Tony. When Tony saw Alice, he said that he was going to torture Alice because so many of his men had been killed by the meth killer, and he thought that it was Alice. Meanwhile, Sheriff's team was at location B to save Jennifer, and one of them saw someone being held hostage in a bus. An officer went to check it, thinking it was Jennifer, but when he checked it, she was one of the civilians who was held hostage by Tony, and suddenly a huge explosion occurred. After that, Tony's men appeared, so gunfire broke out. Turned out, Jennifer was in location A, and she secretly untied Naz, giving him a weapon. After that, Naz pointed Jennifer at gunpoint, saying that he would finish her off, but Jennifer said that now he had to quickly save Alice and also take revenge on Tony. Apparently, Jennifer wanted Naz to kill Tony because she was bored of being Tony's rat. Meanwhile, Tony was still intimidating Alice, but suddenly they heard a gunshot from outside. Alice had previously swallowed a GPS pill so that the police would know where she was. Because of that, a battle ensued at the location A. Alice, Naz, and Jennifer were succeeding in killing Tony's men. Alice found several children who had been held hostage by Tony in a room. Alice asked them to stay in the room and she promised that she would save them later. Jennifer not only finished off Tony's men, but she also killed the police at location A. Meanwhile, at location B, Sheriff's troops succeeded in finishing all of Tony's men. Sheriff immediately instructed all of his troops to go to the point A, while Naz was now facing Tony. After a long duel in the end, Naz managed to corner Tony. Here Naz also admitted to Tony that the meth killer that Tony had been looking for was him. Hearing this, Tony was shocked and asked Naz to bring him to court, but Naz refused because Tony has been arrested several times, but the chief judge always freed him. Brutally, Naz killed Tony. At the same time, Alice came and she heard Naz's words which said that he was the meth killer. Alice immediately left the room, but suddenly she was attacked by someone. It turned out that the person who attacked her was Jennifer. Apparently, Jennifer intended to finish off Alice and Naz so that there would be no witnesses that she was in cahoots with Tony's group. But when Jennifer was going to shoot Alice, suddenly Naz held her at gunpoint from behind. Naz was furious with Jennifer because he saw that Jennifer was going to kill his sister. Naz was about to kill Jennifer, but Alice stopped it. She asked Naz not to kill Jennifer and they would take Jennifer to court, but Naz refused, and when he was really going to finish off Jennifer, Alice was forced to shoot him first. Alice asked Jennifer not to move, but Jennifer secretly took a gun and fired it at Alice. Luckily, the gun ran out of bullets, so Jennifer couldn't move. But not long after, Alice was shot by someone, and he was Cooper. He had been a corrupt policeman who had also collaborated with Tony. After that, Sheriff's troops had just arrived at location A, so Jennifer quickly killed Cooper. Jennifer didn't want anyone to survive but herself, so she could make up a story. The next day, Jennifer was giving a presentation in front of the police and the highest superiors. She explained that Alice was shot by Cooper, a traitor who works for Tony. It could be proven from Cooper's cell phone because he is always in contact with Tony and often sends messages to each other. While Naz is the meth killer, it was proven by several bullets that lodged in the bodies of the police officers there. Even though it was Jennifer who killed the police forces at location A, Jennifer was praised and got applause. Her position would soon be promoted because she had solved two very difficult cases, Tony's case and the meth killer's case. Outside the room, two officers approached Jennifer, wanting to congratulate her. Jennifer said that she still felt sad because Alice shouldn't have died in this incident. Hearing this, the two officers told Jennifer that Alice survived and was now in the hospital. Jennifer panicked because Alice was one of the witnesses to her crime. Shortly, Jennifer went to the hospital where Alice was being treated. Then she quickly put poison in Alice's drink, but not long after that, Sheriff came out of the toilet and asked if Jennifer had been in this room for a long time. Jennifer answered that she had just arrived. Then Sheriff congratulated Jennifer. He also wanted to ask Jennifer some questions. First, Sheriff showed that he had found evidence of a transfer from Tony to a school, and that was Jennifer's child's school. Jennifer avoided it because there was not only her child at that school, but also many children of officials who studied there. But in the second question, Sheriff asked what color is the smoking pipe that Tony often uses, because if it was true that Jennifer was kidnapped by Tony, she would easily know the answer. At the same time, the other police officers also come, making Jennifer nervous. But in the end, Jennifer remembered that the smoking pipe that Tony often uses was yellow with gold stripes. When the box was opened, Jennifer's guess was correct, making her feel relieved because the accusation was not proven. Sheriff said that he took this pipe when he met Tony before the incident, before Jennifer was kidnapped, so it was certain that Jennifer was a corrupt police officer who works for Tony. Sheriff also woke Alice because she was not seriously injured and the shot at that time only hit her vest. Jennifer was already cornered, so she couldn't move and told them that Tony was not alone because there was someone else who ordered Tony. However, Jennifer finally chose to shoot herself. A few days later, showed the chief judge who always freed Tony. When he came out of the court, Sheriff and Alice were waiting for him. Sheriff and Alice knew that the mastermind behind Tony's case is the chief judge.